Okay, everyone, welcome to this week's episode of The Sixth Dimension. I am here with associate producer and permanent guest and fixture of the podcast, filmmaker, director, writer, author, broadcaster, all-round talent, Nathan Hill. Nathan, how are you? It's been a while.
Good evening, Sebastian. How are we?
I'm fine. But more importantly, how are you? How's everything going?
Going well, my friend. Thanks for having me back on the show.
My pleasure. What we're going to be doing this week is we're going to be looking at basically Nathan Hill's entire filmography, his 9 films, plus his prospective features as well, and seeing which ones, I guess, speculating, which ones have potential sequel, prequel material, because he has a huge fan base, he also has a huge filmography as well, and it'd be nice to actually try and figure out what his 10th feature will be, and hopefully by the end of this podcast we'll find the answer. Hopefully.
I hope so. So, yeah, man, look, you're right. You know, over the years there has been prequels and sequels and discussion about follow-up movies and things like that. I think it all goes back. I'm as much a film, historian as you are, and I think that's why we get along so well. If we go back to my initial, breakout movie, which was The Strange Game of Hide and Seek, really, there was a companion feature script that went with that movie. So it all goes right back to the beginnings for me. Every time I've worked on a project and I've developed it properly, as a director does. I mean, let's be honest, feature film that's been in the writing for 12 months, 2 years, 3 years is always a stronger film than the movie that you bang out over the weekend or the week and say, let's shoot a movie, right? Right? Yeah, I think you know that from film school that, the longer you've spent in the pre-production, the stronger the film. So, I mean, even with Hide and Seek, being a mini feature, I mean, it was half an hour. But that took me 3 years to write on and off, and that was actually adapting a novella, properly and authentically. And from that process, you gain so much knowledge and experience being enveloped in that world that when you're in that element, you can then produce if you're a good writer, a good filmmaker, you can produce material on the spot that's got to do with that topic. So from the Strange Game of Hide and Seek, I was able to develop with my co-writer, Nick Levy, the feature-length version of the script, and that's the one that won Shriekfest for us in LA.
Excellent.
So, very early on, it was like, okay, so we're not bad writers, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying we're the best, but we're not the worst either. You know what I mean? So, it was great to kind of have that validity. And then, following that, I guess it was the Black Mass screenplay when I had people like, William Catt tell me it was the best character piece he'd ever read. I mean, that's something you don't take lightly. That's really like a high credit. I think I might have even said this to you in the past, that I really think my writing's been overlooked. Like people say, oh, Nath Hill film. Okay, great. So we're going to get some flashy cars. We're going to get some nice girls. We're going to get some fun. We're going to get a fight scene. They're already predicting what's coming, right? But they've completely overlooked the writing process. You've got to remember, I or myself and co-writer put that together.
So you two devised the entire scenario so you could essentially create a dramaturge for you guys to build up a world that eventually became the Strange Game of Hide and Seek.
And the thing is, Seb, people don't realise, maybe they do, but, with my production company, I get sent screenplays from writers all over the world on almost a daily basis, Wow. Oh, God, yeah. I mean, I had another one today. It was actually really good. So it was about 50 pages, which equals 50 minutes, about a couple, a triangle kind of scenario, a couple wanting to experiment sexually, and so they bring in like a bisexual partner. It was actually pretty riveting reading, But people that they come at me from all over the world, usually it's America, and they'll say, hey, can you, consider my script? And that happens all the time. I think I might have told you in the past that, like, as a fact, that when I was in St Kilda back in sort of, sort of late 2009, 6, 7, 8, I can't remember the year, maybe 2004, that I had both the screenplays to Saw and Wolf Creek come across my desk.
That's correct, yeah, you told me. Personally, not on the podcast, but yes, you told me.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this is something I'm realizing too, is a hell of a lot of scripts that have come past my desk, you know, over the years. And that's what brings us back to the prequel sequel idea, because this is all about the writing, you know. So I guess that's why I'm enjoying this pod and this idea of this pod, because I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the writing and the development stage of things that either do become films or don't become films, you know, or permeate and become films. I think it was, isn't it Coppola that says, you know, his movies were the ones that he grabbed. They were the ideas he grabbed. You know, in other words, you know, you can't grab them all. It's all about the ones you grab. And I think as filmmakers too, I mean, you can be diehard about making this one particular movie like your whole life, and maybe it never gets made, but these other ones pop up, you know. And so I'm questioning that as well. I'm questioning, and I think I saw Stu Simpson in an interview like this, and he said, I think it might have been a Running on Empty, and he said, oh, you know, sometimes you shoot movies for a while and then you'll have a drought and nothing will happen, and then all of a sudden you'll shoot a couple more. And, you know, it is very much like that for directors and directors. You sometimes don't know which one's coming next, and when it does happen, you relish it because you're like, oh, okay, I'm back there again. You know, you have that epiphany, or you have that moment of clarity where your next idea pops in, and that's when it gets really exciting. But you're never quite sure, is it one you've been working on already that you're working towards, or is it something that's going to be sporadic or spontaneous?
Well, yeah, I was listening to an interview with Paul Schrader, the guy who wrote Taxi Driver, and he basically said, if you stick with an idea and the moment it starts to turn sour, then that's a good day, because you've just saved yourself having to write a screenplay.
That's actually so true.
I guess the films that you were talking about, the films that you feel have the potential to grow essentially beyond their product as they are now. So we'll start with, I guess, your most popular early feature, The Strange Game of Hide and Seek.
So basically with that one, you know, there was a feature script written, and then Nick and I took it as far as we could, which was at our peak moment. It was the third feature in line within Hollywood to be made as a Jekyll and Hyde remake. I don't know if you knew that.
No.
And there was two in front of us. One of them actually had Keanu Reeves in it. And then, you know, after time, as time drew on, the idea didn't become hot property. You know, there were just too many people ahead of us. But at the same time, we also pitched it to the UK, and they had just greenlit Jekyll, the series.
Wow.
Yeah. So like I literally kind of like just missed out, and that was the BBC. So, you know, this was again back at that sort of peak time where it was just gangbusters coming out and you know, with all my stuff and you know, aiming high but also getting really, really close. Do you know what I mean? So that was an exciting time. So that screenplay is still there. I haven't looked at it for a while, but it's an amazing script. Every time I read it, I get chills, and I'm immediately transported back into that fantasy land.
Well, I guess then there's sort of a strong leap forward, Tomboys, which really I guess put you on the map in terms of international horror recognition, because that was quite a big film in national and international standards, and that film seems almost ripe for a sequel. And I think this is actually where we initially started talking about it, because Tomboys would work as a sequel or a prequel. But do you have any plans for either or?
You're right. I mean, looking back now, Tomboys was one of those movies where it was one of the first films where I saw it actually, you could download it. Do you know what I mean? Like it was on the Pirate Bay. You know, it was one of those sort of first movies. And I remember sitting there with a mate one night, and he was sort of going through you know, illegal downloads and stuff on his laptop, and he's like, "Oh, holy shit, Tomboys is on here," and I'm like, "What?" You know, so so you can't. That's probably actually really when I felt like I'd made it. You know, when I discovered that, you know, that it was on the bloody, you know, list next to movies like your Transformers or whatever the hell else was new release at the time, you know. So it was great. But yeah, look, as far as the story with that one goes, there was a sequel planned, and the working title was Penitentiary, because it was all set in a women's prison. If you remember in Tomboys, I had Jenny Lovell acting in it, who was actually in the old version of Prisoner. There's homage to Prisoner, the opening at the very start of Tomboys, you know, when the iron grate door slams shut?
Yes.
That was actually an homage to Prisoner. You know, the door would slam shut and then you would get the title card. We did the same thing, but the distro changed it. He wanted the title card to come in later after, like, she'd severed the guy's penis, so it got moved. But initially that's how we were going to have it. And I had a lot of homage to Prisoner going in there at the early days, more so than you'd realise. Mm. So what I wanted to do was take the second movie into the women's prison, because I knew, with my compression style of directing, having basically, you know, a lot of characters squeezed into a small space and watching them kind of, you know, implode or explode, you know, that I could do this. And the funny thing is, when I was scouting, and you know how we're talking before about ideas coming and going and how quickly they can fizzle, well, I was actually scouting for a prison at the same time that Dan Armstrong was scouting for a prison for his Sheborg massacre movie. But he had so much trouble trying to get a prison in Melbourne, he decided, screw it, I'm going to do it at a puppy farm, which was almost like, you know, tongue-in-cheek. But I didn't know that. So I thought he was going to shoot in the prison. So I went off my idea. I said, well, if you're going to do yours in the prison, I'm going to go somewhere else. Not knowing that he was also going to can the idea. So it was kind of like a double whammy at the time. But then I went off and I probably went into pre-pro for Guaylo or something at that stage, and then he went off and did the whole puppy farm thing. But yeah, so that was just a bit of movie trivia for you. But yeah, with the sequel to Tomboys, it starts off with Crystal going into this prison as kind of like, you know, the fish. And you know how the prisoners, like in a lot of these movies and even real life, you know, they kind of get tested, and they get you know how they do that kind of that walk of I don't know what you call it. It's like a lap when the new prisoners come in and they all have to walk the lot, and people are throwing things at them off the balconies. You know, like she's coming in with like her few belongings, and they're like spitting on her, and they're ripping up pillows and throwing feathers at her. You know, that whole kind of sequence. Yeah. In the women's prison. And then she gets in there, and then she discovers that that Kat's got a twin sister, which I think is so awesome, because it was so genre and so kind of exploitation, which is perfect for this movie. And so Crystal buddies up with Kat's sister, and who's a twin sister, but we made her look a little bit different. I think she had like cornrows and like a glass eye or something, you know, classic prisoner type stuff. Okay. And then they kind of, I think the Ali Hall's character as well. I think the Imogen character, she comes in, but she's a weakling, and they kind of like attack her. She gets like raped and killed within like the first act. And Crystal's like, oh, you know, she was always a pussy, you know, you know, really cool stuff going on. But it was really exploitative, and I think it was probably more like a Caged Heat, you know, like a Linda Blair, you know, somewhere between sort of Caged Heat and like a Reformed Schoolgirls. You know, it was one of those type of movies, which would have been awesome. And I think with Wentworth, you know, being, well, it's actually Australia's second highest rating television show. It's massive. I think it would have done really well. You know, I think it would have definitely got a fan base. And my idea behind it, and from a casting perspective as well, was to just basically throw, you know, all the girls we know locally, all the actresses, just throw them all into this women's prison and just basically watch them explode. You know, that was the idea.
That would make for a really good situation, sort of like almost like Assault on Precinct 13 meets Caged Heat, or just any women in prison film, Big Birdcage and stuff like that. But I mean, did you ever get anywhere with, I guess, getting it underway in terms of production, or did it just stay on the page?
It was in development, and you know, some of the script had been written. There was definitely a treatment, and some of the screenplay, maybe an act, first act, I think was locked. And I was already going into, you know, sort of location scouting and stuff, so it was bubbling. And then for whatever reason, as we sort of mentioned before, it just didn't happen. And probably I got sidetracked because of the whole the actual physical prison scenario and what I was talking about with Dan. But then also Wentworth, you know, exploding, and I sort of was thinking to myself, well, you know, without without a decent budget and without enough interest or a pre-distro deal, people are going to watch Wentworth anyway. Do you know what I mean? So it didn't really, for me, eventuate into anything more than that at the time. So I'm not sure if it's something I'd revisit. I don't think I'd do a sequel to Tomboys now because the film's too old. I would maybe consider doing just another type of movie like that. Or if someone was going to call me in to direct a couple of episodes of Wentworth, I wouldn't say no either. You know what I mean?
It's a good idea, but it might be too late to do Tomboys because it's almost 10 years.
Exactly.
Would you consider re-releasing Tomboys? I think 10th anniversary because it is a year away.
Well, SRS just did re-release it only a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
So that's already happened, and then so it's hit Prime and all that sort of stuff. So, and that's amazing. So, but that's kind of where it'll stay. I'm not really, as passionate about it right now, in 2018 as what I used to be, and I guess I've sort of outgrown it. I can't. I've seen the film so many times now. I can't even watch it. I've seen it too many times myself. So. I don't know if I should say that, but I hope people enjoy it. But it's definitely for me, as you said, it was done so long ago, and I've done so many movies since. So it's not something I'm as passionate about at the moment. Doing a sequel to that film,
No, of course not.
But I think the premise was strong. I think it was a cool premise. And, it's nice to know that material's there if I ever had to source it.
I guess next up was Seance, which was kind of like an introspective, somewhat ghost story, very sort of calm in comparison to Tomboys, which was a very erratic film, very, very violent as well.
This will be a quick topic because there definitely hasn't been a sequel written to that film, and I don't think there ever will be. So
But then again, why not? Because it does seem like a fertile ground, the ghost story.
What it was, Seb, actually, when Paranormal came out, I had a mate ring me who's a legitimate filmmaker, and he said, "Your new horror's out." And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Paranormal, it looks sick." And I said, "Dude, that's not mine." And he's like, "Bullshit." He goes, "I know you. That's definitely yours." And I go, "No, bro, it's not. I did a movie called Seance." And he went, "Holy shit." And he was adamant that it was my movie. And just because he knew my mind, and he probably thought it's something I could have done, because that was done. That was a very clever indie. And it was done, for next to nothing. So that's probably why he said that. But my Seance movie, you're right. There's themes in there that could have been ongoing for sure. I mean, you talk about supernatural, you can always find a hook and a way to do it. But for me, though, that movie was experimental, and I was shooting it. Sounds strange, but I was shooting it whilst I was waiting to see whether I was going to get funding on the Black Mass. So my heart wasn't, completely in it. So, as far as sort of a sequel goes, again, supernatural themes, I don't know. There's another script I've got, which is called the, even I'm going blank now. It's called Pray for the Dead. Okay. And Pray for the Dead is probably more of not a sequel, but it's kind of a companion. So it's got the same themes. It is about supernatural. It's about ghosts. It's about possession. It's about the haunted. And that's loosely based on my own father's experiences in the church, which I won't go to in detail on this pod. But he was, he's a self-proclaimed exorcist back in the mid-'80s, which is where a lot of my, horror stories and original passion for horror kind of comes from. So yeah, there is that script, Pray for the Dead, which is for sale at the moment, actually. I've got that one up for sale. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wasn't thinking about the connection between Seance and Pray for the Dead, but it is there.
So Jasper came up next, which I guess was the second renaissance in Nathan Hill's. It's more self-reflexive. You usually play a detective, usually with a J first name. It's usually a crime thriller with, overtones of comedy or maybe some drama, but quite lighthearted sometimes. Model Behavior is kind of an exception. But Jasper was sort of the first one of that. So I guess with Jasper, you kind of do follow up a lot of similar things with later movies like Model Behavior and even Revenge of the Gwylo.
Yeah.
But what about Jasper? Because there is a lot of material in his character enough to carry on for other movies. So would you consider making either a prequel, an origin story for Jasper, or would you consider following on with the additional tales of Jasper?
Jasper, you're right. It's become that kind of signature character. I remember talking to Tommy Hellfire recently, and he was like, "Oh, I love that guy that you do." And I said, "What guy? Which guy are you talking about?" He said, "Jasper." And I said, "Yeah, Jasper." So it's great that it has stuck. People, when they think of the Jasper character, they think of me. I love that. That's really cool. I think he was trying to get me into Stu Simpson's new web series. The Kung Fu one. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So we were talking about that, but he made a good point. And I also played Jasper in Double Trouble, the short film I did with the Jean-Claude Van Damme. Yeah, that was that was for the Funny or Die competition. So yeah, Jasper's funny, and I'm glad you brought it up because Jasper was really a reaction to years, and I mean literally years of being kind of in a dark room, editing horror movies. You know what I mean? And coming from a really kind of dark place, psychically. To produce all the horror films that I was doing. So Jasper was a reaction to that. It was okay. It's time to go outside. It's time to get some sun. It's time to have some fun. And Jasper came from a good place. It came from a comic, happy place. And I think it reflects in the movie. I mean, Mark Bukaitis, did the new Revival music video recently. You might have seen that with the striptease.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And his first thing he said to me, he said, "Man, this is so lock stock." Straight away, he's just like, as soon as I saw it, he saw the movie first without any sound. He was just looking at the vision because he was cutting to the music video track. And he was just looking at vision, and he just said, it was interesting because he was like, "Man, this is like the Melbourne lock stock." I said, "Man, thank you so much for saying that because that's exactly what I was trying to do." It was a Melbourne lock stock. And I don't think there's anything wrong with some of the movies I've made, which are, in a sense, pop culture at the time, or paying homage to movies that are breakout films, or in other parts of the world, whether it's the UK or whether it's America or whether it's Asia. If I'm making a movie because there's been a rippling effect from another film that's greater from another part of the world, I'm kind of happy with that, Seb. Do you know what I mean? Because that's pop culture, man, and I like to think that, I'm right at the helm of it, and I have had people like Mark say, quite publicly, Nath's cutting edge, or, Nath's on the pulse, like he has said it so many times. And, I love that because it kind of inspires me. It keeps me going. It makes me feel like, what I'm doing is right, and at the end of the day, me, I just love to be involved, and I love to get people involved, and I love to see people blossom, and I like to see careers, grow, and I love the creative process. It's very exciting. So I afterwards did start writing a sequel, and I was adamant that I was going to make this film. And this one I think you'll appreciate. It was called Jasper 2: The Poppy Syndrome.
Okay.
Now, when I call it Poppy Syndrome, it was for two reasons. I disguised it because the lead villain was going to be a character called Poppy, and she was a heroin dealer, obviously, and all her gang had the tattoos of the poppy flower on their wrist or something like that. But it was also a kind of a, how should we say, a bit of a subliminal, reaction to the tall poppy syndrome that we have here in this town. So I was sort of wanting to make this, second Jasper film that was very rebellious, that was very independent, that had all the actors that, that weren't kind of getting, the paid dialogue parts, but whom I felt should be getting in this city. So it was a big reaction to, to the tall poppy syndrome, which, let's be honest, in society here it's talked about a lot. So I was kind of being cheeky. Now, the funny thing is that movie didn't get made, but what happened was, Seb, and I think you'll love this, is that movie over time, and as I progressed as a filmmaker and I grew, became the Gwylo. Jasper. So this is interesting fact. So Jasper 2, the Poppy Syndrome, became Revenge of the Gwylo.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah. So, and what happened was when I first met with Trisha Devisha, who plays Ishtar.
Yeah.
Ishtar was originally Poppy.
Oh.
So Poppy was kind of like. Do you remember there was a character in Jasper called Danvers? He was like the lead villain, and he was like guy.
Yep.
See, well, what happened was in the landscape was that Danvers worked for Poppy, and Poppy was like the head villainess, and she controlled everyone in the town. So, in Jasper 2, I was supposed to keep fighting and going up the pyramid to try and get to her, and ultimately she was going to be the one that had the whole family hostage or whatnot. But as I sat and mulled over this idea, as I drafted Jasper 2 and kept redrafting over a couple of years, it evolved. And then I realized it was something bigger than Jasper. And then when there was the lead villainess came in, and I had I think there must have been a Chinatown, chase in there or something like that. It kept evolving, and that's when it became the Gwylo. But what's interesting is that Model Behaviour snuck in between those two films, because that was something I didn't see coming. Do you know what I mean? Because that screenplay was written by Nick Levy. So it's very interesting how that happened, because Jasper may have gone straight to Gwylo, but Model Behaviour was like dropped right into the middle of it. And that also probably actually in a way helped it become Gwylo and not Jasper 2, because we had that pause.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting from a writing perspective, from my body of work anyway. So yeah, that was the sequel to Jasper, my friend. It became the Gwylo.
Okay, great. Well, next up, I guess, on the agenda was Model Behaviour. I think one of your strongest film in terms of narrative plotting and stuff like that. It seems the most intricate, and it's almost shot like a sort of a gritty crime Michael Mann type film. I really
love that. I love whenever we talk about Model and we talk about Stuart Marshall's DOPing, and that it was shot very Michael Mann. And it was actually, only sort of a year ago, I think, when another director came to Stuart and said, I need a movie shot like that Michael Mann style that you do.
Okay.
And what an awesome compliment. I mean, Stuart he's the Michael Mann DOP, and it's not a bad title to have, and he's very bloody good at it. The only mistake I made was in the trailers to Model, I used some of that handheld style. So in the movie it works, but in some of the trailer shots it confused people. They thought actually at one point that the camera had like dropped off the tripod or something, so it actually cheapened my overall kind of look. But that's that was a mistake that I learnt not to do in the future. But yeah, the movie, I think you're right, is solid. Now there has been there was actually, now that you've brought it up, there was a huge following, and I actually literally had people writing to me to make a sequel for that. That's been the only movie where I've had outside, influence, be it, I'm not going to say fan mail because people think I'm a wanker, but there has been fan mail, and people will say, when are you doing a sequel to Model Behaviour? I think the biggest fan of Model Behaviour as far as the actors go was Tony Marculin. Tony Marculin came out and said, the world needs Model Behaviour too. And I was like, oh man, that's so awesome. I love that guy. And then I talked about it with Stuart, and I talked about it with Nick, and we were actually at one point going to call a meeting, the producers, and say, look, do we want to do this? And Stuart's pitch was really strong. The character of Jordan Rhodes, it starts off with him coming out of prison, so I guess it's almost like the start of an Ocean's 11 film in a sense. It's a bit like that. He gets out of jail, he's done his time, and then he goes back to the force. They assign him to a job. I'm pretty sure it was set in amongst, your sort of Brunswick type area where you've got your sort of illegal prostitution going on. I think it was Asian illegal prostitution rink that Jordan Rhodes had to penetrate. Probably fell in love with a brothel madam along the way. You know what I mean? Like another that classic stuff in there that I normally get involved in. But then it actually, as he was pitching it, I started thinking about The Jammed. You know, that Australian film?
Yes, yeah.
D. McLaughlin did. Incidentally, remind me, D's someone else that you need to get on the podcast.
Okay, sure, yeah. I've seen Jammed, yeah.
And she actually directed a Corey Haim movie at the very beginning of her career because she was from LA.
Oh.
Double O Kid, which has also got
John Rhys Davis, yeah,
and Bridget Nelson.
It's an awful movie.
Yeah, absolutely. but I love it because it's Corey Haim, so it's got to.
I really enjoyed it.
DVD, it's got to be awful, and I love it for that reason.
I used to have it on VHS, so you brought some back so many memories.
Well, did you know there was a bloody game for that? There was a Commodore 64 game.
Really?
Yeah. Look, I think you can find it on YouTube. You can see like the demo to it or something. It was just bizarre to think that there was this Corey Haim video game. I just think that's amazing. But yeah, man. So Model Behaviour 2. We had a tagline. Often I would catch up with Stuart, and if something went down, you know, like if there was a drama in real life, you would quite often find me, you know, putting on my kind of, you know, American voiceover kind of, you know, voice, and he would say something and I would finish his sentence by saying Model Behaviour 2. You know, like that was, it became almost like an ongoing joke, you know, every time there was a drama, it must be Model Behaviour 2. You know, so it was one of those things. But look, great premise and stuff. Probably, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to put it to a vote. I'd love to say, really, like seriously say, you know, what would be a better movie, Model Behaviour 2 or Revenge of the Guilo 2? Because I think it'd be one of those two. I think those two movies are very, to me, I mean, I know you said Model's probably the standout, but I think Model and Guilo are on a similar playing field, and I think you know, the vote would be put to one of those two movies.
You started talking about Revenge of the Guilo, but you did a number of short films, loads and loads, actually. I mean, any of those short films, would you consider fleshing out into feature films? Or would they be just short films that you would leave for, like, you know, I guess, were in between projects?
I kind of reached a point very early on where I said to myself, I'm not going to do shorts anymore because I just did so many of them. Like there was one year where I did something ridiculous like 25 short films in a year, and it was literally like a movie every 2 weeks, you know, and most of those I was acting in, and I just kind of exhausted the process. And I just thought to myself, if I want to be serious and I want people to take me serious, I've got to start doing full length. Once I start full length and commit to it, that's all I'm going to do. And the short films that I've done recently have still been for compilation feature films. So, for example, I've just done a short film for Grindsploitation, but I've only done it because it's going to go into a feature-length presentation, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's not like I'll just go out willy-nilly and do a short film just for fun. I don't really have the time for it. I don't really want to tell a story that goes for a couple of minutes. To me, it's kind of like I'd rather pour that into the actual feature I'm working on. You know, I'm definitely a long-form piece professional, and that's also my passion. So yeah, I'll only do the shorts if it's going to be released in some format and it's for a cause. But no, there's no short films I've got that I currently want to develop into a full length film.
Okay, well that's a pity because I do think Vampire Hooker Hotel could potentially become a feature film.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, with Vampire Hooker Hotel and the new one I've just done called Hania Girl. They are both very strong concepts.
Yeah.
I've talked to a couple of distros of mine overseas who have said that by all means, if I go ahead and make these films, they'll definitely be interested. But you know, to really make an impact, I would have to go back to the drawing board to movies like Pray for the Dead or The Black Mass, where you've actually got, you know, feature films that have been in the writing for many, many years. You know what I mean? So it's the difference between kind of making, you know, your schlock horror or your kind of definitive next feature. You know what I mean? So it all comes down to time and energy, my friend.
We'll get on to Guilo then.
Because I know I was saying that Jasper 2 became Guilo, but then after Guilo, and we've talked about Model Behaviour and how everyone wanted a sequel, but when we came to Guilo, there also was something that came out of that as well. And what we discovered from that process was a prequel. And this was the first time I'd ever done a movie and had so much fun that I was like, you know what, I want to do this again. This was like it really hadn't had a passion like that until I made Guilo, where it just all came together. It just fit. It just felt right. I loved the genre. I loved who I was working with. I loved the themes. And so I came up with this idea where we would have a prequel. My character, Joseph, wasn't even in this film. You know, this was just Hill directing, and it was Ishtar when she was on her throne. I think it was set in Hong Kong, and it was when Esme worked for her. It was the backstory for where Esme worked for Ishtar and also robbed her. So it kind of ends with Esme getting on a plane, having robbed her, and fleeing, and then that kind of takes us into present time where, you know, she's now with Joseph, and, you know, she doesn't know it, but the Ishtar and the triads are after her. You know what I mean? But it was just filled to the brim with badass, really hot Asian girls fighting each other and kicking ass. It was everything I love to watch on screen. Very, very much Kill Bill inspired, and Hong Kong action film inspired. So that was the prequel, and it was all about Ishtar, my friend.
I'd buy that for $1, as they say in RoboCop.
It's definitely something that would be enjoyable to make. It's again now, 2018, and obviously I've got a couple of other movies in the pipeline. Sadly, it might be one that's an idea that's lost. But who knows? Who knows what the future will bring? But there was a movie that came out not that long ago called Lady Blood Fight that I really liked.
Okay.
And it had Jenny Wu in it. And there's two Jenny Wus. There's a Jenny Wu in Sydney and there's a Jenny Wu in Melbourne. And the Jenny Wu in Sydney did Lady Blood Flight, and the Jenny Wu in Melbourne is my friend who's in Guilo. And both Jenny Wus were being considered for Guilo, and I ended up casting the one from Melbourne. But Lady Blood Fight was great, and that's got another girl in there, Jet Tranter, and it's got it's got a few Aussie girls and a few girls from Melbourne that are all set. It's all set within a fighting rink, an illegal fighting rink with girl fights, and actually watching that, I kind of felt like I had my fill just for this idea about the Guilo prequel, because that had kind of all the elements in it that I was thinking about. So again, it's probably just being, tapping into pop culture, at the time. And I think you and I have mentioned this before, where a lot of directors, their idea or whatever it is they're sort of writing at the time or thinking about or dreaming about quite often materializes in front of you. Someone else is doing it, you know what I mean? And sometimes it's almost a race to see, who can get to that idea first in time, and quite often you'd miss the boat, and so with the Guilo prequel sequel, I kind of felt like I'd already seen it on screen, you know what I mean? I think Colorblind obviously being, the current film, there's definitely sort of no prequel sequel there. I can't say too much because I haven't released it, but it does end but I will say this, it does end on a cliffhanger. It's the first movie where I've ended on a legitimate cliffhanger. So, if there was interest or there was funding, it is something that could continue. And I think the other thing I forgot to mention too is with Jasper. I don't know, but if you watch that all the way to the end credits, there's even a bonus scene right at the very end of it, and I think a lot of people miss, which is to be continued. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
And there's the girl Samantha, the character. She actually references Poppy.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. I forgot to tell you that one before. I just remembered. But yeah, with the Colorblind as the current film, it's really a cliffhanger ending. And I can't say anything about iPortrait because I'm still cutting it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nathan Hill, for coming on once again and sharing with us your enviable insights and projects that we hope to be a part of in the future, if not just talking about them.
Thank you, buddy, and it's great to get this stuff on record. I hope it's been of interest to some people. Not sure, maybe nobody. Who knows? But it's certainly always fun talking to you, and I'm really glad that we've got all that on record for anyone that is interested out there, or maybe even for you and I to look back on and see what comes of it in the future.
This series was produced by Sebastian Mittelman and devised by William Thompson and Sebastian Mittelman. Stay alive till next time. Oh, and a very special thanks to our associate producer Nathan Hill.